Code blue! A nurse shrieked as Jake's monitor flatlined. I wasn't staring at the screen. I was gagging at his sliced open leg, a cheap steel plate bolted inside. Security ripped the phone from my fingers and smashed every photo. Their lawyer shoved cremation papers at me. Burn the proof. Burn my son. They thought I'd sign. Instead, I whispered the serial number. 20 years logging codes means I can trace it straight to the king who planted it. When I lifted the sheet, I called the police. Now I'm calling in every debt I'm owed. My name is Michael Whitaker, and I'm 42 years old. Every morning, I drive across Omaha's construction zones, checking progress on sites that smell of cut cedar and diesel. My son Jake, a bright 16-year-old with sandy blonde hair, often rides shotgun on weekends, mirroring my stride across concrete foundations. My mentor Carter Jennings, once a hands-on foreman who taught me everything, now runs his empire from glass towers, those calloused hands gone soft with boardroom success. His promised bonuses arrive later each quarter, my bank account stretching thinner while his excuses grow elaborate. What Carter doesn't realize is, I've memorized every inventory code in his system, knowledge I gained during late nights at my kitchen table balancing order sheets. My stomach tightens whenever I see his number on my phone. Even iron friendships can rust. But let me start from the beginning. The morning after the accident hit different. Sunshine streamed through the hospital blinds, but it felt wrong. Too bright, too normal when nothing was normal anymore. The antiseptic smell burned my nostrils as I walked the squeaky clean corridor toward the ICU. That smell always got to me. Reminded me of when my dad was dying of lung cancer. How the chemical cleanliness tried to mask what was really happening. I'd barely slept, just dozed in short bursts on a waiting room chair that seemed designed to prevent comfort. My back ached, but that pain was nothing. Just background noise compared to the worry eating through me like acid. Jake had made it through the night. That's what they told me at 5 a.m. when I cornered a night nurse. Stable but critical were the words she'd used. Doctors speak for alive, but don't get your hopes up too high. I paused outside the ICU doors, taking a deep breath. Had to put on a brave face for my boy. The doors whisked open with a pneumatic hiss, and I stepped into the fluorescent glare. The buzzing lights overhead made everything look harsh, unforgiving. Jake's room was the third on the left. I nodded at the nurse's station as I passed, but something caught my attention. The two nurses there glanced up, then immediately looked away, suddenly very interested in their computer screens. One whispered something to the other. That cold feeling in my gut, it got colder. I reached Jake's door and saw Dr. Myers, the attending physician I'd met last night, talking with a younger doctor, a resident by the looks of his shorter white coat. They were reviewing a clipboard, heads bent together in conversation. When they noticed me, the resident quickly handed the clipboard to Dr. Myers and walked away without a word. "Mr. Whitaker," Dr. Myers said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "We've just updated Jake's chart with his morning vitals." "How is he?" I asked, trying to read his expression. "He's holding his own. The surgery to repair his femur went as well as could be expected, but we're monitoring for infection." He flipped a page on the clipboard. "Actually, I need to discuss some paperwork with you later. Just standard procedure." Something felt off. The way he said standard procedure sounded rehearsed. "Can I see him now?" I asked. "Of course. Just prepare yourself. He's heavily medicated." I pushed past him into Jake's room and nearly staggered at the sight. My son, my strong, athletic boy who could sprint across a baseball diamond like lightning, lay pale and still. Tubes snaking from his arms, an oxygen mask covering half his face. The steady beep of monitors provided the only soundtrack. I moved to his bedside, gently taking his hand. "Hey, buddy. Dad's here." Jake's eyelids fluttered, then opened halfway. Recognition dawned slowly in his drug-hazed eyes. "You gave me quite a scare," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "But you're gonna be okay. Doctors say you're doing good." A young nurse entered, checking one of the IV bags. I noticed how she avoided looking directly at me, focusing solely on the equipment. "How's he really doing?" I asked her. "The doctor has all the information," she replied, not meeting my eyes. "I just need to check his medication." She made a note on a tablet, then hurried out like she couldn't leave fast enough. What the hell was going on? Everyone was acting strange, evasive. The resident doctor I'd seen earlier poked his head in. "Mr. Whitaker, I wanted to mention something. Given the nature of Jake's injuries, we might want to consider expedited final arrangements." I blinked, not comprehending. What? Just thinking ahead, sometimes with these crush injuries, sepsis can set in rapidly. Cremation would be the most hygienic option. He still wouldn't look me in the eye. "He's not even been here 24 hours, I said, my voice rising. "What are you talking about?" "Just protocol to discuss options early. Excuse me." He disappeared before I could respond. Cremation? What the hell was happening? I turned back to Jake and found his eyes open wider now, more alert. He lifted a trembling hand to pull the oxygen mask slightly aside. "Dad." His voice was papery thin, barely audible. I leaned closer. "I'm here, son. Don't try to talk." "Dad, please look at my leg." The words came out as a raspy whisper. My pulse hammered in my ears. "Your leg. What about it, Jake?" "They did something. After you left. Please." His eyes were desperate, pleading. The monitors beeped a nervous staccato as his heart rate increased. I looked down at the sheet covering his lower body. Something was wrong. Very wrong. With shaking fingers, I reached for the edge of the sheet. Just as I was about to lift it, a commotion erupted in the hallway. "Code blue in room 412, all available staff." The head nurse's voice boomed over the intercom. Jake's nurse rushed back in, then immediately turned to leave. "I have to go. Code blue," she said hurriedly. "I'll be right back." In seconds, the hallway filled with the sound of running feet as staff rushed toward the emergency. Suddenly, Jake and I were alone, a moment of dangerous privacy in the chaos. The sheet trembled between my fingers as I prepared to see what had my son so desperate, so afraid. I folded back the sheet and froze. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Jake's thigh wasn't just injured, it was butchered. A fresh surgical incision ran along his outer thigh, the skin puckered and angry where it had been recently stitched. But these weren't normal medical sutures. My stomach turned as I recognized the distinctive pattern, industrial knots. The same kind we used to bind rebar samples on construction sites. "What the hell did they do to you?" I breathed, leaning closer. Jake's eyes found mine, glazed with pain, but desperately trying to communicate something. I gently pulled the sheet back further, exposing more of the grotesque handiwork. The incision was longer than any standard surgical procedure would require, and beneath the swollen tissue, I could see something metallic glinting through. A plate. Not just any medical implant, but something I recognized instantly. My blood went cold. Protruding from my son's mangled flesh was a dull metal plate stamped with JCI C215. The room seemed to tilt around me. I knew that code, had logged it myself just weeks ago. JCI, Jennings Construction Inc. C215, the designation for the cheaper, off-brand steel Carter had started importing last quarter. The stuff I'd questioned because it didn't meet code requirements. Someone had cut open my son and used him as a hiding place for counterfeit building materials. "Dad," Jake whispered, his voice cracking. "They did it. After you left last night. Said it was routine." I fumbled for my phone, hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. My mind raced through the implications. This wasn't medical malpractice. This was deliberate evidence tampering. They were using my son's body to hide evidence that could bring down Jennings Construction. "I'm gonna fix this, Jake," I promised, my voice thick. "I swear to God." I started taking pictures, documenting every angle of the grotesque surgery. The industrial knots, the metal plate, the code stamped clear as day. Each snap of the camera felt like I was either collecting ammunition or digging my own grave. These images could topple Jennings Construction or bury me alongside my career. "What are you doing?" Jake asked weakly. "Getting proof," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Someone's going to pay for this." The smell of antiseptic suddenly seemed sinister rather than sterile. How many people were involved? The resident pushing cremation made sickening sense now. Burn the evidence before anyone could find it. As I zoomed in to capture the serial number more clearly, Jake's monitors suddenly spiked, beeping frantically as his heart rate jumped. "Dad," he gasped. "I can't." The door burst open. A security guard in hospital uniform stormed in, followed by 2 nurses and Dr. Myers. "Sir, photography is strictly prohibited in the ICU," the guard shouted, "and it violates sterile protocol and patient privacy." "This is my son," I roared back, continuing to take pictures even as the guard advanced. "Look what they've done to him." "Mr. Whitaker, you need to stop immediately," Dr. Myers said, his face tight with something that looked more like fear than concern. "You're distressing Jake and compromising his care." The security guard seized my shoulder, trying to pull me away from the bed. I shrugged him off violently, my camera still recording as it dangled midair. Jake's monitors were screaming now, the alarms piercing through the chaos of the room. "Call the police!" I shouted. "Someone's tampered with my son. They've put construction materials inside him." "He's delirious," I heard Dr. Myers mutter to a nurse. "Get a psychiatric consult down here." The second guard grabbed my other arm, and together they started dragging me toward the door. I fought against their grip, desperate to stay with Jake, to protect him from whatever conspiracy had turned my boy into a repository for criminal evidence. "Jake!" I called out, straining against the guards. "I'll be back, I promise." Through the tangle of arms and bodies, I caught one last glimpse of my son. His face had gone slack, eyes rolling back as the monitors shrieked a new warning. Medical staff swarmed around him, blocking my view. Code blue. "Room 316!" someone yelled into an intercom. The last thing I saw before they hauled me into the hallway was a crash cart being wheeled toward Jake's bed at full speed. "I need an evidence officer!" I shouted, my voice bouncing off the sterile walls. "Someone call the police! This is criminal tampering!" With one hand still fighting against the security guards, I jabbed at my phone with the other, punching 911 as frantically as my trembling fingers would allow. The call connected just as one of the orderlies lunged forward. "911, what's your emergency?" The dispatcher's calm voice barely registered before the orderly's fingers clamped around my wrist. "My son, Jake Miller, Mercy Hospital. Someone's implanted—" "Give me that!" The orderly twisted my arm until pain shot up to my shoulder. My phone clattered to the floor, the call still active. Another staff member, a burly guy with patient transport on his badge, stomped on it deliberately, the screen cracking under his heel before he kicked it away. "You can't do this!" I roared, lunging toward where my phone had skidded. "That's evidence!" The security guards tightened their grip, practically lifting me off the ground. Through the doorway, I could still see Jake's bed, surrounded by medical staff, moving with the practiced urgency of people who knew exactly how bad things were getting. Then I heard it. The steady, rhythmic beeping of Jake's heart monitor suddenly transformed into a single, unbroken tone. A sound so simple yet so devastating it cut through everything else. "He's flatlining," someone shouted. "Starting compressions." My whole body went cold. The fight drained out of me for just an instant, long enough for the guards to drag me several steps farther from the door. "Jake!" I screamed, finding my strength again. "Jake!" A nurse rushed to the crash cart, yanking open drawers. Dr. Myers barked commands in medical shorthand I couldn't understand. Someone ripped open Jake's hospital gown as another charged the defibrillator. "Clear!" Jake's body jerked as the paddles delivered their shock. The monitor continued its merciless, unbroken tone. Again, clear. Another jolt. Another failure. I couldn't hear anything beyond my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. It felt like my chest might explode from the pressure building inside. Every cell in my body strained toward my son, as if I could somehow will my own life force into him. "Let me go to him," I begged, my voice cracking. "Please, he needs me." The guards didn't even acknowledge my pleas. They'd become machines, programmed for a single purpose: remove the disruption. Me. Through the doorway, I watched as they shocked Jake a third time. His chest rose and fell with the current, then settled. Still. So terribly still. His face, usually animated with that crooked smile that was all his mother, lay slack against the pillow. Time of death. Dr. Myers began, glancing at his watch. "No!" The word tore from my throat, raw and primal. I surged forward with strength I didn't know I had, breaking one arm free, but it was too late. As they dragged me backward into the corridor, the last image I saw was Jake's chest, the chest I'd watched rise and fall for 16 years, from his first breath in the delivery room to the baseball field where he'd hit his first home run. Lying motionless under the harsh fluorescent lights, the corridor door swung shut with a soft pneumatic hiss that somehow sounded more final than any slam could have. I found myself staring at a plastic sign that read, "Family Consultation Room," in gentle blue letters. The code blue announcement cut off mid-sentence on the overhead speakers. The sudden silence felt obscene. They led me, half-dragged, half-carried, into the consultation room. It was decorated in soothing pastels with generic watercolor prints on the walls. A box of tissues sat on the small table. This was a room designed for bad news, for grief, for the worst moments of people's lives wrapped in institutional comfort. "Mr. Whitaker," one of the guards said, his voice suddenly gentler now that we were away from witnesses. "You need to calm down." "My phone," I said numbly. "I need my phone. The pictures." "Hospital property now," the other guard replied. "You violated multiple policies." I collapsed into one of the padded chairs, my legs no longer able to support me. The reality was crashing down in waves. Jake was gone. My evidence was gone. Something monstrous had happened, and they were already covering it up. "Dr. Myers will be in shortly," one of them said before they both backed out of the room, closing the door firmly behind them. I heard the distinct click of a lock engaging. They'd turned a consultation room into a holding cell. And somewhere down the hall, my son's body held the proof of a crime no one would ever see. 2 hours crawled by like I was watching paint dry in slow motion. I sat in that consultation room alone, my grief and rage taking turns at the wheel. Nobody came in. Nobody offered water or explanations. Just me and those pastel walls closing in. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Dr. Myers who walked in. Instead, a woman in her 50s with steel-rimmed glasses and a charcoal pantsuit entered, flanked by 2 security guards who positioned themselves against the wall. She carried a leather portfolio and wore a badge that read, "Diane Hawthorne, Risk Management Director." Not a doctor, not a grief counselor. Risk management. The hospital was already circling the wagons. "Mr. Whitaker," she said, settling into the chair across from me. Her voice had that practiced sympathetic tone that never quite reached her eyes. "First, let me express our deepest condolences for your loss." I didn't respond. My throat felt like I'd swallowed glass. She opened her portfolio. "I understand this is an extremely difficult time, but there are some matters we need to address immediately." "Where's my son?" I finally managed. "Jake has been transferred to our mortuary services department," she said, shuffling papers. "Standard procedure following an unfortunate outcome." Unfortunate outcome. Like Jake was a failed science experiment. "I want to see him," I said. "That can be arranged shortly. But first," she slid a document across the table. "We need to complete some paperwork regarding today's events." I glanced down at the heading, Release of Liability and Confidentiality Agreement. "What is this?" I asked, though I knew damn well what it was. "Standard documentation." She tapped a manicured finger on the first paragraph. "It simply acknowledges that the hospital followed all proper protocols and that Jake's passing was, sadly, unforeseeable, despite our best efforts." Unforeseeable. My hands began to shake. "And this section," she continued, flipping to page 2, "addresses the unauthorized photography in a sterile environment, which compromised our ability to provide care." I looked up at her, my vision tunneling. "Compromised your ability? Or compromised your cover-up?" Her smile tightened. "Mr. Whitaker, I understand you're grieving. Where's my phone?" She sighed and nodded to one of the guards, who produced a clear evidence bag from his pocket. Inside was my phone, its screen shattered beyond recognition. "Unfortunately, in the commotion, your device was damaged," she said. "Hospital policy requires we secure any unauthorized recordings that violate patient privacy laws." "That was evidence," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Evidence of what?" Exactly. Her tone hardened slightly. Your son suffered catastrophic injuries from a construction accident. The surgical team did everything possible to save him. I leaned forward. Then why was there a steel plate stamped with JCI C215 in his leg? A plate that wasn't in any of his medical records. Something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe even alarm, before her professional mask slipped back into place. Mr. Whitaker, I'm not a medical professional, but I can assure you all implants used by our surgical teams are medical grade and fully documented. She glanced up at the ceiling. Following her gaze, I noticed the small black dome of a security camera in the corner. Every word, every accusation I made was being recorded. Now, she continued, sliding a pen toward me. If you could just sign these forms, we can discuss arrangements for Jake. I picked up the pen, feeling its weight. My dad once told me never to sign anything when you're angry or heartbroken. Right now, I was both. No, I said, placing the pen back on the table. I'm not signing anything. Her smile vanished completely. Mr. Whitaker, I strongly advise, I want to see my son. I want my phone back, and I want to talk to the police. The room went silent. She closed her portfolio with a snap. That's certainly your right, she said coolly. However, given your emotional state and the accusations you're making, I think it's best if we take some precautions. She nodded to the guards. Please ensure Mr. Whitaker remains comfortable while we process his requests, for everyone's safety. The guards straightened, their postures shifting from passive to alert. Am I being detained? I asked. Of course not, she said, standing. You're free to leave the hospital at any time, but access to certain areas, including mortuary services, requires proper authorization and escort for security reasons. Translation. I wasn't getting anywhere near Jake's body without their supervision. She tucked her portfolio under her arm. I'll have someone bring you some water. These situations can be dehydrating. With that parting shot, she left. The guards didn't follow her. Instead, they stepped outside, positioning themselves on either side of the door. Through the narrow window, I could see them standing at attention, arms crossed. I was trapped. Not officially detained, but effectively imprisoned. The overhead lights suddenly dimmed, leaving only the emergency lighting glowing softly in the corners. Power cycling, one of the guards explained through the door. Happens every night at this time. I sank back into my chair, the semi-darkness closing around me like a shroud. Jake was gone. My evidence was destroyed. And now I was stuck in this purgatory, unable to leave, unable to reach my son, unable to do anything but sit in this artificial twilight. The night stretched before me, a vigil I couldn't escape, with guards ensuring I remained exactly where they wanted me. I must have dozed off sometime after midnight, my chin dropping to my chest in that painful half-sleep you get in hospital chairs. Every time I startled awake, the guards were still there, silhouettes against the hallway light. The room had gotten colder. I pulled my jacket tighter, thinking about Jake's baseball tournaments where we'd huddle under blankets during those early spring games. The metal bleachers would freeze your backside while your breath made little clouds in the morning air. Jake never complained, though, not once, even when his fingers were too numb to grip the bat properly. A noise in the hallway jerked me fully awake. Voices, one gruff and authoritative, the other defensive. I straightened up, blinking away exhaustion. The door swung open, flooding the dim room with corridor light. A stocky figure stood in the doorway, holding what looked like flowers. Mike, you in here? I squinted. Hank Brower stepped into the room, a vase of bright carnations clutched in one hand. My next-door neighbor for 8 years, retired Omaha homicide detective, and the guy who taught Jake how to change oil when he turned 15. His salt and pepper buzz cut caught the light as he set the flowers down. Jesus, Mike, you look like hammered shit. He glanced back at the guards, who hovered uncertainly in the doorway. These boys been keeping you company all night. What are you doing here? I asked, my voice rough from disuse. Brought flowers for Jake. His eyes told a different story. Nurse at the front desk said you were down here. He turned to the guards. Oh, you fellas mind giving us a minute? One of the guards stepped forward. "Sir, we've been instructed to—" Yeah. Hank waved him off, reaching into his pocket and pulling out his old detective badge. Most retired cops kept them. Few flashed them. "I need you boys to do me a favor. Dr. Sarnowski's looking for you both. Something about incident reports from last night. Said to meet him in administration, pronto." The guards exchanged glances. "There's no Dr. Sarnowski on staff," the taller one said. Hank's eyebrows shot up. "No. Huh. Gray hair, glasses, walks with a limp. Just came up from legal?" He checked his watch. "Well, someone's looking for you. Said it was urgent. Something about improper restraint protocols." That got their attention. The taller guard muttered something to his partner. "We'll be right back," he told Hank. "Sir, please don't leave this room," he added to me. "Me wouldn't dream of it," I said. As soon as their footsteps faded, Hank grabbed my arm. "We've got about 3 minutes before they figure out I'm full of shit. Let's move." "Move where? They've got Jake's body. They destroyed my phone, the evidence. And they'll keep you spinning your wheels until whatever they're hiding is good and buried." He pulled me to my feet. "You can fight them from in here, or you can fight them from out there. Your call." I hesitated only a second. "Out there?" Hank nodded. "All business now. Service elevators this way. Used it plenty when I was working cases here." We slipped into the hallway, Hank moving with surprising agility for a man with a bum knee. He'd taken a bullet 20 years back, never talked about it, but you could see the stiffness on cold mornings. "Stairs at the end of the hall led to the basement," he murmured. "Maintenance uses a service elevator that goes straight to the parking garage." "How do you know all this?" A ghost of a smile crossed his weathered face. "Spent half my career sneaking witnesses in and out of this place. Some things you don't forget." We pushed through a door marked "Staff Only" and descended a flight of concrete stairs. The basement corridor was dimly lit and smelled of industrial cleaner. Oxygen lines ran along the ceiling, hissing softly like angry snakes. "This way," Hank said, leading me past storage rooms and maintenance closets. We reached the service elevator, a bare metal box with scuffed walls. Hank punched the button for the parking level. As the doors closed, I finally exhaled. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know what I would have—" "Save it," he cut me off. "This is just the beginning. Whatever you saw in that room with Jake, it's big. Hospital security doesn't lock down grieving fathers unless someone important is pulling strings." The elevator shuddered to a stop. The doors opened to reveal the concrete expanse of the parking garage, still dim in the pre-dawn light. "My truck's over by the east exit," Hank said. "We'll get you home, cleaned up, then figure out next steps." We stepped out, our footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. Freedom tasted like cold concrete and exhaust fumes, but it was freedom, nonetheless. We'd made it halfway to Hank's truck when a man in a courier uniform approached, clipboard in hand. "Michael Whitaker?" he asked. Glancing between us, I stopped. "That's me." "Delivery for you, sir." He held out a large manila envelope. "Need your signature here." I hesitated, looking at Hank, who shrugged. I scrawled my name on the line and took the envelope. "What is it?" Hank asked as the courier walked away. I tore it open and pulled out a stack of papers. The Jennings Construction logo blazed across the top of the first page. My stomach dropped as I scanned the contents. "Termination notice?" I said, my voice hollow. "Effective immediately. They're canceling my insurance too." I flipped to the next page. "Paychecks stop as of today." Hank swore under his breath. "Carter works fast." I looked up at him. "How did they even know I was here?" "Same way they knew to put guards on you." Hank took the papers from my trembling hands. "Someone's making calls." We stepped outside the parking garage just as the sun was beginning to rise over Omaha. The light should have felt warm, hopeful. Instead, it cast everything in a harsh, unforgiving glare. I'd lost my son, my job, my insurance, all in less than 24 hours. That sunrise looked colder than any prison cell. Mid-morning light sliced through the blinds in Hank's kitchen, laying stripes across his cluttered table. Coffee mugs competed for space with stacks of old case files, and a police scanner that crackled with chatter every few minutes. I'd been here 100 times for poker nights and football games, but never like this, desperate, hollowed out. Hank hunched over his laptop, the blue glow making the lines in his face deeper. He'd changed into jeans and a faded Huskers sweatshirt after we got back from the hospital, but I was still wearing yesterday's clothes, stiff with sweat and hospital disinfectant. "You sure about this?" Hank asked, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "I worked IT support before moving to construction management," I said. "Trust me, Carter never changed his passwords. Too damn arrogant." I leaned over and typed, "C. Jennings 1962, into the admin login field for the Jennings construction server. The screen flickered, then populated with folders. "Son of a bitch," Hank muttered. "You're in." My hands trembled slightly as I navigated through the familiar file structure. Every project has safety inspection records. They should be under... There, Hank pointed. Safety Archive. I clicked the folder, heart pounding. A list of subfolders appeared, each labeled with project names and dates. I scrolled to the Westridge Commercial Plaza, Jake's last job site. "This is it," I said, double-clicking. The screen froze. A spinning wheel appeared. "What's happening?" Hank asked. "I don't..." Before I could finish, the folder contents flickered and vanished. I clicked back, then forward again. Nothing. The entire Safety Archive folder was now empty. "What the hell?" I refreshed the page. Still empty. "Someone's deleting them," Hank said, leaning closer. "Right now." I frantically clicked through other folders, one by one. Inspection reports, material certifications, structural analyses, all disappearing before our eyes. "They know we're in the system," I said. "They're purging everything." The memory of Jake's leg flashed before me, that steel plate with its damning code. JCI C215. Now I understood the rush to cremate. The guards, the termination. They weren't just covering up cheap materials, they were erasing a crime scene. "Wait," Hank pointed at a notification that popped up in the corner of the screen. "What's that?" I clicked it. A system alert about a file transfer from a temporary cache. A single document appeared, some kind of automated log. "It's an access record," I said, scanning it quickly. "Shows who entered the system and when." "Can they see this?" Hank asked. "Probably not. It's a ghost file, system generated, separate from the main database." I scrolled through the entries, most showing routine access from office IPs. Then I stopped cold. "Look at this," I said, pointing to an entry from 2 nights ago, the night Jake died. "Carter's personal login, 11:52 p.m. Hank squinted at the screen. "From where?" I clicked on the entry details. IP traces to Monsachi. Heritage Surgical Center, Suite 9B. "A surgical center?" Hank's voice dropped. "At midnight." The implications hit me like a physical blow. He was there when they put that plate in Jake's leg. "Or he did it himself," Hank said grimly. I remembered Carter's hands at the company barbecue last summer. Soft, manicured. Nothing like the calloused paws he'd had when we worked side by side. But they were surgeon steady when he poured drinks. "Print it," Hank ordered. "Now." I hit print and Hank's ancient printer groaned to life in the corner. While it slowly spit out the page, I tried to make sense of it all. Why would Carter be at a surgical center in the middle of the night? I asked, more to myself than to Hank. "To make sure no one saw what they were hiding in your boy's leg," Hank replied, grabbing the printout as it emerged. He slapped it onto the table. "This is it, our first real lead." The room suddenly felt too small, the walls pressing in. I'd spent 21 years trusting Carter Jennings, believing in his integrity. Now I was sitting in my neighbor's kitchen, staring at evidence that he'd been involved in whatever happened to Jake. "We need to get to Heritage Surgical Center," I said, standing up. "Now." "Hold on," Hank cautioned. "We can't just walk in there asking questions. We need a plan." I was about to argue when the sound of tires on gravel cut through the morning quiet. A car door slammed outside. Hank moved to the window and peered through the blinds. "It's Sarah," he said quietly. "Your wife's here." My heart sank. Sarah. In the chaos of the past 12 hours, I hadn't even called her. She'd been visiting her sister in Des Moines when Jake's accident happened. I'd left messages saying he was hurt, but not... She doesn't know, I whispered. About Jake. Hank's expression softened. You need to tell her. I stared at the printout on the table, the proof we needed, the first step toward justice for Jake. Then I looked toward the front door, where footsteps approached. Sarah would be devastated. She'd need me there, holding her while her world collapsed. But every minute we waited, Carter was erasing evidence. What do I do? I asked Hank, my voice breaking. The doorbell rang. The doorbell rang again, more insistent this time. Sarah, go, Hank said, folding the printout and tucking it into his shirt pocket. I'll make coffee. I nodded, grateful for his understanding. The next hour was the hardest of my life. Sarah collapsed in my arms when I told her about Jake. Her sobs tore through Hank's little house, and I held her until she had nothing left. Grief is a strange thing. It hollows you out, then fills that space with lead. By early afternoon, Sarah had fallen into an exhausted sleep on Hank's couch. Her sister was driving up from Des Moines to be with her. I stood in the kitchen doorway, watching my wife's chest rise and fall. I can't just sit here, I whispered to Hank. Not when the people who did this are destroying evidence. Hank nodded, his face grim. Heritage Surgical Center closes at 5. If we leave now, we can get there before end of day. I wrote Sarah a note, telling her I was following a lead about Jake's accident. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. You ever done any acting? Hank asked as we climbed into his battered Ford pickup. What? He pulled open his glove compartment and withdrew 2 clipboards. Today, you're a fire inspector. Heritage Surgical Center sat in a gleaming medical complex on the west side of town, all glass and brushed steel, with a fountain burbling in the circular drive, the kind of place where doctors performed nose jobs on trophy wives, not the kind where you'd expect to find construction company CEOs in the middle of the night. Follow my lead, Hank murmured as we pushed through the revolving doors. And look bored. Inspectors always look bored. The receptionist glanced up as we approached. Young, blonde, with the kind of perfect smile that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Can I help you, gentlemen? She asked, her eyes flicking to our clipboards. Hank leaned against the counter, casual as could be. Fire code inspection, just routine. He flashed an ID card so quickly I couldn't even see what it was. We need to check Suite 9B. Her smile faltered. I don't have anything on the schedule about... That's the point of random inspections, ma'am, Hank cut in, his tone friendly but firm. They're random. I stood there trying to look official, my palms sweating. If she called our bluff, we'd be done before we started. She hesitated, then sighed. I'll need to call Dr. Renfrew. It's his suite. That's fine, Hank said easily. But we're on a tight schedule. Code says we can proceed with inspection while waiting for the tenant. He tapped his clipboard. Section 4, paragraph 7. I was impressed. For all I knew, he was making it up. But it sounded legitimate enough that the receptionist wavered. I suppose that's all right, she said finally. It's down the hall to the left. I'll page Dr. Renfrew. Appreciate it, Hank said, already moving. I followed, trying not to look like we were hurrying. The hallway was hushed, our footsteps muffled by plush carpeting. Suite 9B had a discreet brass plaque. Dr. Edward Renfrew, orthopedic surgery. Hank tried the door, unlocked. We slipped inside. The reception area was empty, lights dimmed. Beyond it, a door led to what had to be the surgical suite. I pushed it open and stopped dead. Jesus, I whispered. The room gleamed. Every surface sparkled under the harsh overhead lights. Stainless steel tables, tile floors, equipment racks. And the smell hit me immediately. Fresh paint mixed with industrial-strength disinfectant. They cleaned it, I said, my voice hollow. All of it. Hank moved past me, running a finger along one wall. It came away with a faint smear of white. Paint's barely dry. I remembered the time marker from the computer log. Carter was here 2 nights ago. Why repaint so soon after? To cover something up, Hank said grimly. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small flashlight with a purple beam. UV light. Shows blood, even after cleaning. He swept it across the floor. The walls, the surgical table. Nothing glowed. They were thorough, he muttered. I moved to the floor drain in the center of the room. It shone like new, without a speck of rust or residue. I knelt down, ran my finger around the edge. This has been replaced, I said. Look, the grout's still soft. Hank joined me, his knee cracking as he squatted. You're right. Why replace a drain unless something went down it that you don't want found? The door behind us creaked. We both spun around, but it was just a janitor with a mop bucket. Sorry, the man mumbled, an older guy with stooped shoulders. Didn't know anyone was in here. Hank recovered first. Fire inspection. Don't mind us. The janitor nodded, but his eyes darted nervously between us. He pushed his bucket toward a utility closet in the corner. Place looks spotless, I said casually. You do all this? He paused, not looking at us. Just doing what they told me. Who's they? Hank asked. The janitor's shoulders tensed. Board called yesterday, said scrub every inch of this suite. Walls, floors, everything. He glanced up, then away. Never had to do that before. My heart hammered against my ribs. When did you finish painting? This morning, he said. Third coat. Hank and I exchanged looks. The janitor seemed to sense our interest. He hurried to finish his task, grabbing a plastic bag from his cart and heading for the door. Wait, I called, but my legs felt suddenly weak. The janitor hesitated, then pushed past us. We followed him outside just in time to see him toss the bag into a large metal dumpster marked with bright red lettering, Biohazard, Incinerator. My knees nearly buckled. Incineration. Just like what they wanted to do with Jake. They're burning everything, I whispered. We followed that dumpster like our lives depended on it. Hank drove his battered Ford Ranger, keeping 2 cars between us and the waste management truck as it pulled away from Heritage Surgical Center. If they're taking that to an incinerator, we need to intercept it, I said, gripping the dashboard. Hank nodded, his weathered face set in concentration. Hospital probably has its own medical waste facility. Fewer questions that way. The truck wound through Midtown Omaha, eventually turning into the hospital's service entrance, the same hospital where Jake had died. My stomach knotted at the sight of the building. Park over there, I pointed to a loading zone. I'll follow on foot. Like hell you will, Hank said, pulling into a visitor spot instead. We do this together or not at all. We trailed the truck at a distance, watching as it backed up to a concrete structure separate from the main building. The driver hopped out, swiped a keycard, and began unloading containers. That's the incinerator, Hank whispered. Used to investigate a case here years back. They burn everything from medical waste to confidential records. I started forward, but Hank caught my arm. What exactly is your plan here? Dive into a biohazard dumpster. If I have to, I said, yanking free. We'd made it halfway across the lot when a voice called out behind us. Mr. Whitaker. I turned to find a thin man in a cheap suit holding a manila envelope. His eyes had the flat, professional detachment of someone who delivered bad news for a living. Michael Whitaker, he repeated. Who's asking? Hank stepped slightly in front of me. The man extended the envelope. Process server. I have a court order for Mr. Whitaker. My hand shook as I took it. The paper felt hot in my grip, though I knew that was just my imagination. I tore it open and scanned the document, the words blurring together until certain phrases jumped out. Expedited disposition of remains, potential public health risk, cremation to commence within 72 hours of this order. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me. They're going to burn him, I whispered. They're going to destroy everything. Hank took the papers from my trembling hands and read quickly. Judge Harmon signed this less than an hour ago. Carter's got connections in the courthouse. The process server was already walking away, his job done. Beyond him, I could see the waste management driver closing up the incinerator building. We're too late, I said, watching as whatever evidence might have been in that dumpster disappeared behind locked doors. Hank gripped my shoulder. Not yet. We've got 72 hours. To do what? The helplessness in my voice surprised even me. We've got nothing, Hank, nothing. We've got 72 hours, he repeated firmly. Come on, we need to regroup. I remember the drive back to Hank's place in fragments. The dashboard clock showing 4:17 p.m. A school bus passing us, filled with kids Jake's age. My own reflection in the passenger window, a hollow-eyed stranger. Back in Hank's cluttered living room, we laid out everything we had. It wasn't much. "One photo," I said, staring at the blurry image on Hank's laptop. He'd managed to recover it from my phone's cloud backup, but the resolution was terrible. Just enough to make out the edge of the metal plate in Jake's leg, the letters JCI barely visible. "And one timestamp," Hank added, tapping the printout showing Carter's access to the surgical suite. "Half erased, but it puts him there." "It's not enough." I rubbed my eyes. "No judge would even look at this." Hank checked his watch. "We've got 48 hours to find more." My phone rang, startling us both. Unknown number. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Mr. Whitaker," a crisp female voice said. "This is Marissa Delgado, counsel for Memorial Hospital. I'm calling regarding the disposition of your son's remains." My throat tightened. "What about it?" "I understand you've received the court order. I wanted to inform you that we'll be moving your son's body to crematory storage tonight, in preparation for the procedure." "You can't do that," I said, my voice rising. "That's my son. My son." "The court has determined this is a matter of public health," she replied, unmoved. "The body will be transferred at 8 p.m. You may, of course, be present to pay your respects before storage." "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll proceed without you, Mr. Whitaker. The sheriff's department has been notified in case there are any disruptions." Hank was frantically writing something on a notepad. He slid it across to me. "Ask about personal effects." "What about Jake's personal effects?" I asked, forcing my voice to steady. "His clothes, his things?" A pause. "Those items are being held as potential evidence in the ongoing investigation into the accident." "So you're keeping his clothes but burning his body?" I couldn't keep the bitterness from my voice. "Mr. Whitaker, I understand this is difficult. You understand nothing," I snapped. "The transfer will happen at 8 p.m., she repeated. "You have until then to say goodbye." The line went dead. The dial tone hummed for a moment before I hung up, the sound like a countdown in my ears. Hank and I sat in silence for a long moment. 48 hours, I finally said. 48 hours before they destroy everything. By the time we left the hospital at 8:30 p.m., I felt like I'd aged a decade. I'd said my goodbyes to Jake in that sterile, guarded room, with a clipboard-wielding administrator hovering nearby, making sure I didn't try anything. What was I going to do? Throw my son's body over my shoulder and make a run for it? They'd moved him to what they called temporary storage, a fancy way of saying a freezer in the basement of the crematorium attached to the hospital. The room smelled of industrial cleaner, and something else I couldn't name but made my stomach turn. I kissed Jake's cold forehead one last time, whispering promises I had no idea how to keep. "We need legal help," Hank said as we drove away, the hospital's lights shrinking in the rearview mirror. "Someone who can file an emergency injunction." I nodded, already scrolling through my contacts. "I know a guy who handled my divorce years back. Let me try him first." But James Holbrook wasn't taking my call. His secretary listened to my rushed explanation, put me on hold, then came back with regret in her voice. "Mr. Holbrook says he can't take cases against Memorial Hospital or Jennings Construction. Conflict of interest." I tried not to read between the lines, but it wasn't hard. Carter's tendrils reached everywhere. "I've got a list," Hank said, pulling into a gas station. "Old contacts from my days on the force, lawyers who don't scare easy." We sat in his car under the fluorescent lights, making call after call. Some didn't pick up. Some listened politely before declining. Others were blunter. "You're talking about taking on the biggest developer in 3 counties and a hospital with an army of attorneys," one said. "With what? A blurry photo and a timestamp. Call me when you've got something real." By midnight, we'd worked through Hank's entire list. Not one taker. "They all know," I said, staring out the window at the empty parking lot. "They all know what happens to people who cross Carter Jennings." "We're not done," Hank insisted, but I could hear the doubt creeping into his voice. Back at his place, I checked my bank account on my phone. The numbers stared back at me like an accusation. With no job and no insurance, what little savings I had wouldn't last a month. Not enough for a retainer for the kind of lawyer we needed. "I'm going to sell my truck," I said suddenly. Hank looked up from his laptop. "Your truck? The F-150? You love that thing." "It's just a truck." I was already typing up a listing. "Blue Book says it's worth about $22,000. If I price it at 18, maybe I can get a quick sale by morning." "And then what?" "Then maybe I can afford a lawyer who doesn't give a damn about Carter's connections." I hit post on the listing, added some quick photos I had on my phone. The timestamp said 1:17 a.m. The cremation was scheduled for the day after tomorrow, just 36 hours left. The next morning dragged by in a blur of unanswered messages and dead ends. No bites on the truck, no lawyers willing to take the case. Even the local news tip line I'd called had gone silent after an initial expression of interest. By evening, I was sitting in Hank's garage, the familiar smell of motor oil and WD-40 doing nothing to calm my nerves. The concrete floor was cool beneath me as I leaned against his workbench, the laptop balanced on my knees. I was drafting a GoFundMe page, though I knew it was probably too late for that to help. What would I even write? Help me stop powerful people from cremating evidence they hid inside my dead son. Every word I typed felt hollow. I deleted and started over, again and again. "Any luck?" Hank asked, coming in with 2 mugs of coffee. I shook my head. One guy offered $12,000 for the truck, said he'd pay cash tomorrow. That's something. It's not enough. I took the coffee, the mug warming my cold hands. Not nearly enough. The familiar smell of the dark roast reminded me of mornings at the construction site, Jake dropping by with thermoses after school. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else now. Hank sat down heavily on an old wooden stool. "I've been thinking about calling in some markers with the county ME's office. Maybe we could..." The lights flickered once, twice, then went out completely. The garage plunged into darkness, the only illumination coming from my laptop screen, which cast an eerie blue glow over our faces. "Power outage?" I asked. "Probably just the breaker," Hank said, but he didn't move to check it. Instead, he stared at my laptop screen, where the corrupted photo of Jake's leg was still open. I looked down and felt my stomach drop. The image was degrading before our eyes, pixels scrambling and dissolving at the edges. The crucial area showing the metal plate was now just a blur of digital noise. "No, no, no," I muttered, frantically trying to save the file again. "We can't lose this too." But it was too late. The file had corrupted further, leaving us with even less than the nothing we already had. 36 hours, I whispered, staring at the ruined image. 36 hours and we've got nothing. The darkness in Hank's garage felt complete, like being buried alive. I sat frozen, staring at the corrupted image that represented our last hope, now dissolving into digital noise before my eyes. "This can't be it," I whispered, my voice sounding hollow in the blackness. "There has to be something else we can..." A soft click interrupted me as emergency lanterns suddenly flared to life near the door. The harsh LED beams cut through the darkness, casting long shadows across the concrete floor. And there, silhouetted in the doorway, stood a woman. My eyes adjusted to the sudden light. She wore blue scrubs under a dark jacket, her posture rigid with tension. It took me a moment to recognize her. Melissa Ruiz, one of Jake's ICU nurses. The one who'd always spent extra time checking his vitals, who'd snuck him pudding cups when the dietary staff wasn't looking. But what caught my attention wasn't her unexpected appearance. It was what she carried. A standard hospital surgical tray, gripped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. She stepped into the garage without a word, her sneakers silent on the concrete. The emergency lights cast deep shadows under her eyes, revealing exhaustion I hadn't noticed during her hospital shifts. She moved with purpose, setting the tray down carefully on Hank's workbench. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask, rising to my feet. "How did you find us?" Melissa didn't answer immediately. Instead, she reached into her pocket and produced a small evidence bag, sealed with official medical tape. She placed it on the tray with the precision of someone handling nitroglycerin. Inside the bag was a jagged fragment of bone, unmistakably human. Even in the uneven light, I could make out the metal stamp pressed into its surface. JCI C215. My legs nearly gave out. There it was, the physical proof we'd been desperate to find. The same code I'd seen embedded in Jake's leg, now preserved in undeniable, tangible form. I took this before they closed him up, Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. I knew something was wrong when they cleared the room, when they brought in that steel plate. Hank moved closer, examining the evidence bag without touching it. You risked your job for this. I risked more than my job. She looked up at me then, her eyes brimming with a mixture of fury and shame so intense it was almost physical. Carter Jennings is my father. The garage seemed to spin around me. I gripped the edge of the workbench to steady myself, the metal cold under my fingers. Your father? The words felt strange in my mouth. Melissa Ruiz Jennings, she said. I dropped his name years ago when I went to nursing school. He wanted me to join the business. I wanted to help people. I tried to process this information, looking for any physical resemblance between this compassionate nurse and the man who'd built an empire on shortcuts and betrayal. Maybe something in the determined set of her jaw, the analytical sharpness in her eyes. Does he know you took this? Hank asked, gesturing to the bone fragment. No, but he will soon. Her voice hardened. My whole life I've watched him cut corners, watched him justify it as business. I confronted him about the substandard materials last year. He said I didn't understand construction, that I was being naive. She straightened her shoulders. I understood enough to know what I was seeing in that OR. They brought your son in, and suddenly my father was there, overseeing an orthopedic procedure he had no business being part of. The emergency lights cast stark shadows across her face as she continued. I've been collecting evidence for months, safety reports he buried, materials that failed testing but were used anyway. I just never thought. Her voice caught. I never thought he'd go this far. With a suddenness that made me jump, the overhead lights flickered back on. The power had returned, filling the garage with harsh fluorescent brightness that made the surgical tray look even more out of place among Hank's tools and car parts. The moment the electricity stabilized, Melissa's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, glanced at the screen, and her expression changed. It's here, she said, tapping at her phone. The video file I've been waiting for. What video? I asked, stepping closer. Security footage from the surgical suite. I have a friend in IT who owed me a favor. She held up her phone. This is from the night Jake was brought in, the night my father came to the hospital. The screen showed a timestamp, 11:52 p.m., exactly matching the log entry we'd found. The grainy footage displayed a sterile operating room, and there, unmistakably, was Carter Jennings in surgical scrubs, handing something to a doctor I didn't recognize. The metal plate caught the light as it passed between them. They didn't know about the backup server, Melissa said, her voice tight with controlled rage. They wiped the main system, but this footage was automatically archived. I stared at the phone, watching the man who had once been my mentor deliberately plant evidence inside my dying son. The video was grainy but unmistakable. The timestamp in the corner matched exactly 11:52 p.m., the night Jake's scaffold had collapsed. The same night they'd rushed him into emergency surgery. Melissa held the phone steady as we huddled around it. The surgical suite looked different on video than when Hank and I had found it freshly painted. Machines beeped in the background. A ventilator hissed rhythmically. And there, on the table, my throat closed up, was Jake. That's my boy, I whispered, my voice breaking. Hank squeezed my shoulder, his calloused hand a steady anchor. The camera angle showed most of the room from above. Two surgeons worked on Jake's shattered leg, their movements precise and practiced. Then a side door opened, and a third figure entered, taller than the others, his bearing commanding even in surgical scrubs. Carter, I said, the name like acid on my tongue. Despite the surgical mask and cap, there was no mistaking him. That straight-backed posture, those eyes that missed nothing. I'd worked beside the man for over 20 years. He carried a small metal case, the kind used for sterilized surgical instruments. Watch, Melissa said, her voice tight. On screen, Carter approached the table. The other surgeons looked up, clearly surprised by his presence. He said something. The video had no audio, and they stepped back, exchanging glances. Carter opened the case. Inside lay what I now recognized as the steel plate stamped JCI C215. He lifted it out, holding it up to the light as if inspecting it one final time. "Cheap Chinese steel," Hank muttered. "Counterfeit grade." One of the surgeons gestured questioningly. Carter's response was immediate, his finger jabbing toward the door. The surgeon shook his head, but Carter leaned in close, saying something that made the man's shoulders slump in defeat. As the surgeon reluctantly moved away, Carter took his place beside Jake's exposed femur. His movements were confident, practiced, like he'd done this before. He positioned the plate carefully, then looked directly at the remaining doctor. Even without audio, I could read his lips clearly. "Audit-proof this." The surgeon nodded, taking instruments from a nurse to secure the plate to Jake's bone. My hands curled into fists so tight my nails bit into my palms. He put that thing in my son. He put evidence in my dying son. "Keep watching," Melissa said. The footage continued. Carter supervised as they closed the incision, then checked his watch and strode out the same way he'd come in. The timestamp showed he'd been in the room less than 15 minutes. "He made them rush the procedure," Melissa explained, her voice cold with controlled fury. "That's why Jake's condition deteriorated so quickly afterward. The infection started at the implant site." Thunder cracked outside, startling all three of us. A storm was rolling in, matching my mood perfectly. "How did you get this?" Hank asked, his detective instincts kicking in. "Hospital security footage is tightly controlled." Melissa's lips thinned. "It's not from the hospital system. My father keeps private backups of everything. Paranoia dressed up as thoroughness. This was in his personal cloud storage." "You hacked your father's accounts?" I asked. She met my gaze unflinchingly. "I still had access from when I worked summers at the company during college. He never changed the passwords. Too arrogant to think anyone in his family would betray him." A bitter smile crossed her face. "He was wrong." "When did you get this?" Hank pressed. "After he disowned me." She pocketed her phone, the screen blinking with a low battery warning. 6 months ago, I reported safety violations at 3 Jennings construction sites to OSHA. Anonymous tip, but he knew it was me. I'd confronted him about the substandard materials before. The memory seemed to pain her physically. He called me to his office, told me I was dead to him, said I'd chosen strangers over family loyalty. "So you took his files as insurance," Hank concluded. She nodded. "I downloaded everything I could access. Most of it was encrypted. But this video file came through yesterday when my decryption program finally cracked it." I stared at her phone, where the paused image showed Jake's exposed leg with Carter's counterfeit plate being positioned. "This backs up my corrupted photo. Between this and the bone fragment, we've got him. If the authorities will listen," Hank cautioned. "Carter's got half the city council in his pocket." "We don't need the city council," Melissa said. "We need the state investigators. They've been trying to build a case against my father for years, but evidence keeps disappearing." Another crack of thunder, closer this time. The garage lights flickered but held. Rain began to drum on the roof, a sudden downpour that matched the intensity of what I was feeling. Rage and hope, swirling together like the storm outside. Melissa's phone gave a warning beep and flashed red. "Battery's almost dead," she said. "We need to make copies of this. Right now." The storm broke sometime after 3 a.m., leaving behind that clean, washed-out smell that always reminds me of new beginnings. We'd spent the night huddled around Hank's kitchen table, our faces lit by laptop screens and emergency lanterns, making copies of that damning video and preparing for what came next. "Time to move," Hank announced, zipping up his weathered leather jacket. The old detective checked his watch, a chunky analog thing that had probably seen more crimes solved than most cops see in a lifetime. "State Crime Lab opens at 6. We need to be first in line." I watched him pack the bone fragment into a small cooler, handling it with the reverence of a priest with communion. That jagged piece of my son's femur, stamped with Carter's counterfeit steel code, was our smoking gun. "You sure they'll take it?" I asked, doubt creeping in as exhaustion pulled at my eyelids. What if Carter's already gotten to them? State lab's different from city, Hank said, sealing the cooler with evidence tape. Different jurisdiction, different payroll. Carter's got city officials in his pocket, but state's another ballgame. He patted the cooler. This little beauty's going straight to people who've been trying to nail him for years. Melissa looked up from her laptop, where she'd been working on what she called the nuclear option. I've set up an anonymous live stream account, she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. Once we're sure the bone fragment is safely delivered, I'll go live with the video, annotations, and a timeline of events. You're putting your name on this? I asked. She met my eyes with a determination that reminded me of Jake when he'd set his mind to something. My full name, Melissa Ruiz Jennings, his daughter. That's what will make people believe it. He'll come after you, I warned. Let him. Her jaw tightened. I've been running from what he is for too long. I thought about what she was risking, her career, her safety, maybe even her life, all to help a stranger get justice for his son. It made my throat tight. Why? I asked. Why are you doing this for Jake? For me? She looked down at her hands, surgeon's hands like her father's, but used for healing, not harm. Because 6 months ago, I suspected but didn't act. I knew he was cutting corners, using substandard materials. Her voice grew quiet. I reported some violations, but I should have done more. Maybe if I had... Don't, I said. Jake's accident isn't on you. No, she agreed. But what happens next is... I can finally make this right. Hank cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the emotion filling his kitchen. Sun'll be up soon. We need to roll. We moved with purpose then, dividing tasks with military precision. Hank would take the bone fragment to the state crime lab. Melissa would prepare to go live with the video once we got confirmation of delivery. I would monitor social media and news outlets, ready to amplify the story the moment it broke. 23 hours until they're scheduled to cremate Jake, I said, checking my watch as we headed for the door. Let's make them count. Outside, the pre-dawn air was cool and damp. Hank's ancient Chevy Impala sat in the driveway, its engine already running. The man treated that car like it was his partner. Good luck, I said, clasping his shoulder. Luck's for amateurs, he replied with a wink. We've got evidence. He slid into the driver's seat, the cooler secured on the passenger side with a seatbelt. As he pulled away, he flipped on his hazard lights. Not technically legal, but as he'd explained earlier, nobody questions a determined old man in a hurry. Back inside, Melissa and I watched the little dot that was Hank's phone move across the map on her laptop screen. The interstate was clear at this hour, and he made good time heading toward the state capital. He's about halfway there, Melissa announced at 5:15 a.m. Time to start the stream. She'd prepared everything meticulously. The video queued up, annotations explaining what viewers were seeing, documents showing the timeline of events. She'd even created graphics comparing the legitimate steel specifications with the counterfeit plate's composition. Ready? I asked. She nodded, then hesitated. This is the point of no return. Once I go live, there's no taking it back. Jake can't take back what happened to him either, I said quietly. That was all she needed. She hit the button, and the live stream began. She introduced herself clearly. My name is Melissa Ruiz Jennings. I am a registered nurse at Omaha General Hospital, and I am the daughter of Carter Jennings, CEO of Jennings Construction. What you are about to see is evidence of criminal negligence, fraud, and medical malpractice. The video played. In the corner of the screen, a counter showed viewers joining, first dozens, then hundreds. Melissa narrated what they were seeing, her voice steady and clinical, pointing out exactly what her father was doing to Jake. The comments section exploded. Is this real? Someone arrest this monster. That poor kid. Melissa had tagged every local news outlet, every reporter known for investigative journalism, and several state officials. By 5:45 a.m., the viewer count had topped $5,000, and the first news organizations were reaching out through the live stream chat. Hank's at the lab, I said, watching his dot stop moving on the map. He's delivering the evidence now. Melissa nodded, continuing her methodical explanation of the footage. She was in the middle of describing how the infection had likely started when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Breaking. Allegations of medical fraud at Omaha General. State police en route. I refreshed my social media feeds. The story was spreading like wildfire, with local reporters already broadcasting live from outside the hospital. On the traffic app, I could see a cluster of emergency vehicles moving rapidly across town. "It's working," I whispered, hardly daring to believe it. "They're actually responding." The clock on the wall read 6:07 a.m., 24 hours until Jake's scheduled cremation, but the sirens wailing in the distance suggested the clock might finally be turning in our favor. The sunrise painted the hospital facade in shades of crimson and gold, like nature itself was calling out the blood on their hands. I stood on the elevated section of the parking lot, hands jammed in my pockets against the morning chill, watching it all unfold. From this ridge, I had a perfect view of the chaos below, a chaos we had created. Yellow windbreakers moved with purpose through the crowd, state health regulators, their badges catching the early light as they strung heavy chains through the main entrance doors. Each link clinked against metal with a sound that rang like justice. Facility closed. Regulatory violation. Read the notices they slapped onto every entrance. Bold black text on alarming red paper. No mistaking that message. "Never thought I'd see the day," Hank murmured beside me. His breath fogged in the cool air, his weathered face stoic but satisfaction gleaming in his eyes. Below us, ambulances lined up in neat formation as patients were carefully evacuated. Medical staff scrambled to coordinate transfers while uniformed officers supervised every move. Organized chaos, if there was such a thing. "Look at that," I said, nodding toward a cluster of news vans circling the perimeter. Channel 5, Channel 8, even the national outlets. Satellite dishes extended skyward like mechanical flowers seeking the sun. Reporters with perfect hair did stand-ups near the police barricades, their cameramen jockeying for the best angles. I should have felt triumph watching it all come crashing down. Instead, a hollow ache spread through my chest. All this spectacle, all this justice, and Jake was still gone. "You okay?" Hank asked, not looking at me directly. He knew men like us didn't need eye contact for the hard conversations. "No," I answered honestly, "but I will be." The smell of diesel fumes drifted up from the emergency vehicles below, mixing with the crisp autumn air. It reminded me of construction sites, of Jake visiting me at work, wide-eyed and curious about every machine, every tool. Those memories felt like they belonged to another lifetime now. A sleek black sedan with tinted windows turned into the hospital's circular drive, moving slowly through the chaos. Even before it stopped, I knew who was inside. "Right on cue," Hank said, straightening up. "Your old mentors arrived to face the music." The car door opened, and Carter Jennings emerged like a man stepping onto a stage, composed, deliberate, dressed in an impeccable charcoal suit that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage. Two attorneys flanked him immediately, leaning in to whisper urgently in his ears. But Carter's face betrayed nothing as he buttoned his jacket with practiced ease. My hands balled into fists in my pockets. This man had been like a father to me once, had taught me everything I knew about construction, about leadership, had handed me that hard hat all those years ago with words about building straight and living straighter, and then he'd put counterfeit steel into my son's body to cover his tracks. "Easy," Hank murmured, sensing the tension radiating from me. "Let the system work." Camera flashes popped like lightning around Carter, reporters shouting questions that blended into unintelligible noise from our distance. He raised a hand, that familiar gesture I'd seen him use at press conferences, at groundbreakings, at company parties. The crowd quieted slightly. Then I saw them. Two plainclothes detectives cutting through the crowd with badges held high. The taller one, a woman with her hair pulled back severely, spoke into Carter's space. His attorneys immediately stepped forward, creating a barrier, but the detectives weren't backing down. Hank's hand came down on my shoulder, steadying me. I hadn't even realized I'd taken a step forward. "This is how it should happen," he said firmly. "By the book. Clean." He was right. If I went down there now, created a scene, it could jeopardize everything. The evidence needed to speak for itself. The bone fragment, the video, the corrupted photo now restored by the state's digital forensics team. I watched as Carter's confident posture finally faltered. The detective was showing him something on a tablet, Probably Melissa's video. His face drained of color even as he maintained his composure. One of his lawyers put a hand to his forehead, clearly distressed. "They're reading him his rights," Hank observed, his experienced eye catching details I missed. Sure enough, the female detective was speaking deliberately, methodically. Carter's hands came forward, and the male detective produced handcuffs that glinted in the morning light. Carter Jennings, pillar of the community, construction magnate, my former mentor, was being arrested in front of the hospital where he'd hidden evidence inside my dying son. Vindication surged through me, powerful and electric, but right behind it came a wave of grief so intense it nearly brought me to my knees. Justice wouldn't bring Jake back. Nothing would. Hank's grip on my shoulder tightened, anchoring me to the moment. Below us, they were leading Carter toward a waiting police cruiser, his attorneys trailing behind like anxious shadows. "One step at a time," Hank said quietly. "We've done what Jake asked." We looked at his leg, and now the whole world's seeing what we found. The cuffs made a metallic click that carried all the way up to our vantage point. Carter flinched, just a tiny jerk of his shoulders, but I caught it. For a man who'd spent decades projecting nothing but iron confidence, that small, involuntary reaction said everything. "Look at that," Hank muttered. King of concrete, brought low by a single bone fragment. The female detective guided Carter toward the waiting cruiser, one hand firmly on his elbow. His lawyers trailed behind, still shouting objections that nobody seemed to be listening to. The crowd of reporters surged forward, a forest of microphones and camera lenses pushing for better angles. "Mr. Jennings! Did you knowingly use substandard materials? Was Jake Miller's death part of a cover-up? How many buildings in Omaha contain counterfeit steel?" Carter kept his head high, jaw set, eyes forward, the same expression he'd worn walking through chaotic job sites when something had gone wrong. I'd admired that steadiness once. Now it just looked like the practiced mask of a man who'd been hiding things for years. They reached the police cruiser. Carter ducked his head as they guided him into the back seat. The door slammed with finality. And just like that, the man who'd built half of downtown Omaha was being driven away in custody. "Come on," Hank said, tugging at my sleeve. "Let's get out of here before the press spots you." We retreated to Hank's truck, parked behind the hospital maintenance shed. My phone buzzed non-stop. Reporters who'd somehow gotten my number. Old colleagues, even Jake's school principal. I silenced it without looking at the screen. "You hungry?" Hank asked as we pulled away. I wasn't, but I nodded anyway. We needed somewhere to go, something normal to do while the world exploded around us. We ended up at a diner near Hank's house, tucked into a back booth with coffee and untouched plates of eggs. The television above the counter was tuned to a local news channel, closed captioning scrolling across the bottom. Carter's arrest was the lead story, complete with helicopter footage of the police cruiser making its way downtown. Jennings' construction stock halted trading after plummeting 30% in the first hour after news broke, the caption read. The waitress turned up the volume as she passed. "An emergency board meeting has been called," the anchor announced gravely. "Sources inside Jennings Construction tell us investors are already looking to distance themselves from what could be the biggest construction fraud case in state history." The screen split to show Carter's corporate headshot beside a stock ticker that looked like a ski slope, straight down. "Jesus," Hank whispered. "They're tearing the whole company apart." I should have felt something. Satisfaction, maybe, or at least relief. Instead, I just felt hollow. Jake was still gone. The company where I'd spent my entire adult career was imploding, and somewhere in the middle of it all was me, suddenly without a job, without a son, without any clear path forward. My phone buzzed again, this time with an email notification. I almost ignored it, but the subject line caught my eye. "Urgent. Jennings Construction Pension Plan. Status change." "What is it?" Hank asked, noticing my expression. I showed him the screen. "My pension. Frozen pending restructuring due to company financial reorganization." Hank let out a low whistle. "Damn, they're not wasting any time." 21 years, I said, the number suddenly hitting me hard. 21 years I put into that company. "You'll get it back," Hank said firmly. "Once the dust settles, they can't just take that from you." But we both knew that wasn't necessarily true. In corporate bankruptcies, pension funds often ended up gutted, with former employees lucky to get cents on the dollar. Another piece of my life potentially gone. The diner television switched to a legal analyst in a wood-paneled studio. Carter Jennings will be arraigned tomorrow morning, the analyst explained. The question on everyone's mind: will the judge grant bail to a man facing potential charges of criminal fraud, evidence tampering, and possibly even negligent homicide? They cut to a file photo of Carter shaking hands with the mayor at a ribbon-cutting ceremony, then dissolved to his mugshot, hair disheveled, eyes hard, jaw set in defiance. From penthouse to jailhouse, the anchor intoned solemnly. How the mighty have fallen. I pushed my plate away, suddenly needing air. The walls of the diner felt too close, the chatter too loud, the smell of grease too strong. You okay? Hank asked. No, I admitted. But I will be. Outside, my phone buzzed yet again. This time it was Melissa Ruiz, Carter's daughter and Jake's nurse, the woman who'd blown the whole thing open. Michael, she said when I answered. Her voice was tight, controlled. They're asking me to testify tomorrow. Will you be there? Would I be there? To watch Carter Jennings formally charged with crimes that led to my son's death. To see the man who'd mentored me, then betrayed me, face a judge? Yes, I said. I'll be there. I hung up and looked at Hank, who was watching me with concern. Arraignment tomorrow, I told him. They want Melissa to testify. Hank nodded. Then we'll be there too, front row. The sun was setting now, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Tomorrow would bring the arraignment, more cameras, more questions. The slow, grinding wheels of justice beginning to turn. But for tonight, all I could think was, Jake, I kept my promise. I looked at your leg. And now, finally, everyone else is seeing what I found. 2 months after Carter's arrest, I stood in the middle of what would someday be the Jake Miller Rehab Scholarship Wing. Right now, though, it was just a skeleton of steel and concrete rising from the South Campus grounds. The autumn wind cut through my jacket, rattling the scaffolding and sending a shiver down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Deliveries delayed again, I told Hank, who was studying the blueprints spread across the hood of his truck. Steel shipment won't be here until next Tuesday. Hank's weathered face creased with concern. That puts us 3 days behind schedule. 4, counting the cure time for the next concrete pour. I ran a hand through my hair, feeling the weight of responsibility pressed down on my shoulders. We're cutting it close, Hank. The scholarship wing had been Melissa's idea, born in the chaos after Carter's arrest. The hospital board, desperate to salvage their reputation, had donated the land. Local businesses, eager to distance themselves from the Jennings scandal, had pledged materials. And I'd found myself in charge of a volunteer crew, mostly guys I'd worked with over the years, men who wanted to build something that mattered, something for Jake. We've got good people, Hank reminded me, rolling up the blueprints. They'll work through the night if they have to. I nodded, but the worry lingered. The ribbon cutting was scheduled for December 1st, just before the first real snow. Every day lost put us closer to winter construction conditions that would slow everything down even more. It's the damn bankruptcy, I said, kicking at a pile of gravel. Every supplier who had ties to Jennings Construction is either scrambling for new contracts or going under themselves. The ripple effects of Carter's downfall had spread through Omaha's construction industry like a shockwave. Subcontractors who depended on Jennings jobs were struggling. Material suppliers were calling in old debts, and in the middle of it all, I was trying to build a memorial to my son with scraps and promises. Remember that summer you and Jake rebuilt the deck? Hank asked suddenly, his breath fogging in the cold air. I smiled despite myself. Lumberyard shorted us on cedar. Jake insisted we finish anyway. And you did. Hank clapped me on the shoulder. One problem at a time, Michael. That's how anything gets built. The sight lights kicked on automatically as dusk settled, casting long shadows across the foundation. I walked the perimeter, checking the rebar layout for the next pour. Everything had to be perfect. This wasn't just another building. This was Jake's legacy. My phone buzzed with a weather alert. Freeze warning overnight. Great. Just what we needed with exposed concrete still curing in sections. We need those thermal blankets, I called to Marco, our concrete specialist. Temperatures dropping below freezing tonight. Marco nodded, already directing his crew to cover the fresh sections. One more complication in a project that seemed determined to challenge us at every turn. I checked my watch. Almost 7 p.m. Most construction sites would be shutting down, but our volunteer crew kept working, headlamps bobbing in the growing darkness. These men had known Jake, had watched him grow up visiting job sites. For them, this wasn't just another build. "Got a minute?" Hank asked, approaching with his phone in hand. "What's up?" "I might have a solution to our steel problem." He showed me his screen, a text conversation with someone named Frank Donovan. Frank runs operations at Midwest Structural. They've got surplus I-beams from a canceled highway project. I raised an eyebrow. Midwest Structural. They were Jennings's biggest competitor. Exactly, Hank grinned. And they're feeling pretty good about outlasting Carter. Frank says they'll donate the steel if we put a small plaque acknowledging their contribution. It wasn't ideal. I'd wanted this to be purely about Jake, not corporate PR. But beggars couldn't be choosers, and Midwest's steel was good quality, better than what we'd been able to source elsewhere. "Tell him yes," I said. "But the plaque goes inside the mechanical room." Hank chuckled. "I'll negotiate the details." He walked away to make the call, leaving me alone with the half-finished framework that would someday help kids recovering from injuries like Jake's. If we could finish it on time, if the materials came through, if the weather cooperated, too many ifs. I climbed the temporary stairs to what would be the second floor, careful on the wooden treads. From here, I could see the whole site, and beyond it, the lights of Omaha spreading out like fallen stars. The city Jake had loved, the city that had taken him from me. The wind picked up, whistling through the exposed beams. Above me, the night sky stretched vast and indifferent, stars appearing one by one as darkness deepened. The skeleton of Jake's wing stood stark against that backdrop, incomplete, vulnerable, but with the promise of something meaningful, just like the justice we'd found. Carter was awaiting trial, his empire in ruins. The hospital had new safety protocols. Inspectors were combing through every Jennings project for similar fraud, but none of it brought Jake back. I ran my hand along a concrete column, feeling its solid permanence. At least this would last. At least kids would heal here, in a place with Jake's name on it. If we could finish it in time. 1 week later, I woke to the sound of ice pellets tapping against my bedroom window. The weather forecast had warned us about a cold front, but nobody expected a full-blown snowstorm this early in the season. October in Nebraska could be unpredictable, but this was pushing it. I threw on my heaviest work coat and grabbed my truck keys. The digital clock on my nightstand read 5:17 a.m. The site crew wouldn't be in for another hour, but I couldn't sleep knowing what that snow might be doing to our progress. The roads were treacherous, slick with that dangerous first snow that catches everyone unprepared. My truck's tires crunched through the accumulation as I pulled into the construction site. 3 inches had already fallen, with more coming down hard. "Damn it," I muttered, seeing white blankets covering our equipment. The tarps we'd left over the curing concrete were sagging under the weight of wet snow. If that concrete froze before curing properly, we'd have to tear it out and start over. Another delay we couldn't afford. I fired up the nearest generator, grateful for the rumble that broke the eerie silence of the snow-covered site. One by one, I checked the others. 2 were sputtering in the cold, struggling to maintain the heat needed for the concrete blankets. I adjusted the chokes and prayed they'd hold. By 6 miles, Marco and 2 other workers had arrived. We worked silently, clearing snow off the tarps, checking temperatures, and reinforcing the temporary heating system. The storm showed no signs of letting up. "Dedications still on for Saturday?" Marco asked, snow collecting on his hard hat. "Has to be," I answered, though I was starting to wonder. "Donors are flying in. Press is scheduled." He nodded, understanding the pressure. We'd fought too hard to get this far. Jake's memorial wing had to open on time. Around 9, a delivery truck struggled up the access road, chains on its tires clanking against the pavement. The driver looked miserable as he hopped down from the cab. "Got a special delivery from Michael Whitaker," he called over the wind. "Had to try 3 different routes to get here. Interstate's a parking lot." My heart quickened. This was the package I'd been waiting for, Jake's bat. I signed for the long wooden crate and carried it carefully to the heated trailer that served as our temporary office. Inside, the small space heater had taken the chill off, but I could still see my breath. I set the crate on the folding table and found a pry bar. The wood creaked as I worked the lid open, revealing layers of protective packaging. Carefully, I peeled back the bubble wrap to reveal the smooth maple of Jake's Louisville Slugger, the bat that had connected with the game-winning home run his freshman year. His coach had presented it to him afterward, signatures of the whole team decorating the barrel. I lifted it gently, feeling its perfect weight and balance. Jake had kept it mounted above his bed, his proudest achievement, he'd always said. Not because it was a home run, but because it had won the game for his team. The memory hit me like a physical blow. Jake, at 14, grinning ear to ear as he carefully positioned the bat on its wall mount. "Right here, Dad, so I can see it every morning when I wake up." I blinked back tears, running my thumb over the worn grip where his hands had once been. This bat would have the place of honor in the entrance hall of his memorial wing, a symbol of the strength and teamwork the rehabilitation center would foster in other injured kids. If we could mount it properly, I dug deeper into the packaging, searching for the custom bronze bracket we'd ordered. It was supposed to be specially designed, baseball-themed supports that would display the bat at the perfect angle while securely fastening it to the wall. But my fingers found only packing material. "No," I muttered, emptying the crate completely. "No, no, no." I grabbed the delivery paperwork, scanning for information. There it was, a note scrawled in the margin. "Bronze bracket back ordered. Supplier warehouse under lien from Jennings Construction bankruptcy proceedings." The irony was almost too much to bear. Even in ruins, Carter's company was still finding ways to hurt us. The custom bracket was stuck in legal limbo, caught in the tangle of creditors and lawyers picking apart the remains of Jennings Construction. I set the bat down carefully and stepped outside the trailer, needing air despite the cold. The snow was coming down harder now, great fat flakes that limited visibility across the site. 4 days until dedication. 4 days to find a solution. Hank's truck pulled up, chains biting into the snow. He climbed out, carrying 2 thermoses. "Thought you might need this," he said, handing me one. Steam rose from the hot coffee as I unscrewed the cap. "The bat came," I said flatly. "But the mounting bracket's stuck in a warehouse tied up in the Jennings bankruptcy." Hank's expression darkened. "When do you need it by?" "Saturday. Dedication's at noon." He took a long sip of coffee, thinking, what kind of bracket are we talking about? "Custom bronze, baseball-themed, strong enough to secure a bat to the wall permanently." "Can't we just use something else? Hardware store must have wall mounts?" I shook my head. "It's not just a practical thing, Hank. This is the centerpiece of the memorial. Jake's bat needs to be displayed properly. It's the symbol of everything this place stands for." Hank nodded slowly, understanding. In the silence that followed, a generator sputtered and died. Marco hurried over to restart it, his figure blurred by the falling snow. 4 days, I said, more to myself than to Hank. 4 days to figure this out. Or the dedication happens with an empty space where Jake's bat should be. The symbolism wasn't lost on me. An empty space, just like the one Jake had left behind. I barely slept Friday night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that empty space on the wall where Jake's bat should hang. Around 3 a.m., I gave up trying and went to the kitchen to make coffee. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the old floors. Jake's absence felt particularly heavy in those pre-dawn hours. By 4:30, I was dressed and in my truck, scraping frost from the windshield with fingers that felt stiff from more than just the cold. The dedication ceremony wasn't until noon, but I needed to be at the site early. Had to make sure everything was perfect. Even without the bracket, I was determined to find some way to display Jake's bat. The roads were clear, but slick with black ice. Streetlights cast long shadows across the pavement as I drove through the sleeping city. It was strange how peaceful everything looked, covered in a thin layer of frost that sparkled under the lights. The world going about its business like nothing had changed, while mine had been torn apart and pieced back together in ways I never could have imagined. Remember those summer nights when Jake was little? He'd beg me to pitch to him in the backyard until it got too dark to see the ball. Just 5 more, Dad, please. And I'd always give in because I couldn't resist that smile. The rehabilitation wing stood silhouetted against the lightening sky when I pulled into the parking lot. We'd finished construction 2 days ago, a minor miracle considering the supply issues. The building looked good, solid. Jake would have been proud of the craftsmanship. I was unlocking the main doors when headlights swept across the lot. Hank's truck pulled up, chains rattling against the pavement. Strange. He wasn't supposed to be here until later. I waited as he parked and climbed out, moving with unusual urgency for a man his age at 5 in the morning. "Mike!" he called, hurrying toward me. "Wait till you see this!" He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Judge Harmon signed an emergency order at midnight. I've got a court officer and a locksmith meeting us at the warehouse in 20 minutes. My heart jumped. The bracket? Hank grinned, that same crooked smile he'd worn when he'd smuggled me out of the hospital months ago. With any luck, I hesitated, looking back at the building. The caterers are coming at 7. The florist, Melissa's on her way. She'll coordinate everything. He dangled his truck keys. "You coming or what?" 40 minutes later, we stood in a dusty warehouse while a bleary-eyed manager unlocked a storage cage. The court officer, a no-nonsense woman named Rivera, held up the emergency order whenever the manager started to protest. "This is highly irregular," he kept saying. "These items are under lien." "This specific item," Officer Rivera corrected, "has been released by judicial order for a public memorial service. Everything else stays put." The cage door swung open with a metallic screech. Inside were shelves of construction materials, all labeled with Jennings construction inventory codes. My stomach tightened at the sight of them. "Box 47B, Hank read from the paperwork. "Custom bronze bracket." The manager sighed dramatically but led us to a shelf near the back. The box was small, wrapped in brown paper with a shipping label addressed to the rehabilitation wing. My hands trembled slightly as I took it. "Is that it?" Hank asked. I carefully unwrapped one corner, revealing the gleam of polished bronze. "That's it." The drive back was a blur. The eastern sky had turned a pale pink, promising a clear, cold day. Perfect for the dedication. I cradled the box on my lap, relief washing over me in waves. By the time we returned, the site was buzzing with activity. Melissa directed workers setting up chairs, her clipboard like a conductor's baton. She spotted us and hurried over. "Did you get it?" I held up the box. "Got it." Her face broke into a smile. "Thank God, the news crews will be here in an hour." Marco and his team were already positioning the ladder beneath the spot where the bracket would go. I carefully unpacked it, revealing the beautiful craftsmanship. 2 bronze baseball gloves designed to cradle the bat, mounted on a plaque with Jake's name and dates. "It's perfect," Melissa whispered. The installation took less than 30 minutes. Marco's crew worked with precision, drilling into the exact spots we'd marked weeks ago. The bracket fit perfectly, secure and prominent above the entrance doors. I went back to my truck and retrieved Jake's bat, still wrapped in protective cloth. As I carried it across the lot, I felt the weight of what we'd accomplished. Not just the building, but justice for Jake. A legacy that would help other kids. The hours flew by. Guests began arriving at 11:30. Doctors, nurses, physical therapists, donors, reporters. Hank stood by the door, playing unofficial greeter in a suit I'd never seen him wear before. Melissa directed people to their seats, program booklets clutched in her hand. At 5 minutes to noon, I stood alone in a small side room, Jake's bat in my hands. I'd polished it that morning until the wood gleamed. Every signature, every scuff told a story, Jake's story. I ran my fingers over the smooth lacquer, feeling the grain beneath. The clock ticked to noon. Someone knocked softly. "It's time," Melissa said. I nodded, took a deep breath, and followed her out. The crowd fell silent as I walked to the front, bat in hand. Cameras flashed. I could feel every eye on me as I approached the entrance where the bracket waited. With careful movements, I lifted the bat and placed it into the bronze cradle. It fit perfectly, as if it had been made for this moment. I stepped back, looking up at this piece of Jake now permanently enshrined. A podium had been set up nearby. I moved toward it, my footsteps echoing in the silence. The taste of sawdust and winter pine filled my lungs as I drew a breath. Looking up, Jake's ritual before every at-bat, I gripped the edges of the podium. The silence deepened. Everyone waited for me to speak. Words caught in my throat as I looked out at the sea of faces. Some I recognized. Hank in his pressed suit, Melissa with her clipboard, Marco and his crew standing proud at the back. Others were strangers, donors in expensive coats, reporters with cameras, students who'd never met Jake but would benefit from his legacy. I glanced to my right, where a large screen had been set up for the live stream. The local news had split their broadcast. Our dedication on one side, the courthouse on the other. Carter Jennings, his silver hair now disheveled, stood before the judge in an orange jumpsuit. Gone were the tailored suits and the confident smile. His shoulders slumped forward as the bailiff kept a firm hand on his arm. The courtroom feed had no audio, but the closed captioning told the story. Bail denied. Flight risk. Pattern of fraudulent behavior. The camera panned to show investors and former employees filling the gallery, their faces grim with betrayal. Someone in our crowd whispered, "They're about to announce the sentence." I turned back to the bat mounted above the entrance. The morning sun caught the bronze bracket, sending a warm glow across the polished oak. Jake's bat, the one he'd hit his only home run with, now permanently enshrined, a physical promise fulfilled. The memory of that home run washed over me. Jake, 14 and small for his age, connecting with the ball so perfectly it sailed over the fence. His face, pure shock, then joy as he rounded the bases. The coach had given him that bat afterward, said it was lucky. Jake had slept with it under his bed for weeks. My fingers tightened around the microphone. I'd rehearsed a speech about resilience and healing, about the rehabilitation center and its mission. But looking at that bat, at the courthouse feed, at the faces waiting for me to speak, those prepared words felt hollow. 20 years ago, I began, my voice steadier than I expected. Carter Jennings handed me my first hard hat, told me the world rewards straight beams and straighter men. The crowd grew perfectly still. For 2 decades, I believed that. I taught my son to believe it too. My eyes drifted to the courthouse feed, where Carter now sat with his head bowed as the judge spoke. But somewhere along the way, Carter forgot his own lesson. Straight beams became expensive. Straight men became inconvenient. A reporter's camera flashed on the courthouse screen. The judge's mouth moved, and the caption appeared, 20 years. My son Jake died because someone decided that profit margins mattered more than safety, more than truth, more than a 16-year-old boy's life. I paused, letting the weight of those words settle, and then they tried to bury that truth inside his body. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. On screen, Carter was being led away, shuffling in ankle chains toward a side door. They thought they could hide their shortcuts in the dark. They thought they could wash away evidence with fresh paint and legal threats. I looked up at Jake's bat, gleaming in the sunlight. But here's what I've learned. No matter how deep you bury it, truth finds its way to the surface. Hank nodded slowly from his spot by the door. Melissa wiped at her eyes. This building isn't just a memorial. It's a promise. I gestured to the rehabilitation wing behind me. A promise that every young person who comes through these doors will get the second chance my son never had. A promise that their care will never be compromised by shortcuts or cover-ups. The courthouse feed switched to a shot outside, where Carter was being escorted to a transport van. Reporters swarmed, microphones thrust forward. The ticker at the bottom of the screen announced, Jennings Construction officially dissolved in bankruptcy proceedings. I turned away from the screen and faced the crowd directly. Today, we're not just opening a building, we're making a statement. My voice grew stronger with each word. That some things can't be buried. That some truths refuse to stay hidden. The sun broke fully through the clouds then, bathing the entrance in golden light. Jake's bat seemed to glow from within, the bronze bracket catching fire. I gripped the microphone one last time and spoke the words that had been building inside me since that hospital room. Since that moment I pulled back the sheet and saw what they'd done to my son. No truth stays buried forever. The crowd rose to their feet, applause thundering across the courtyard. On the screen behind me, Carter disappeared into the transport van, his empire in ruins, his freedom in chains. But I wasn't watching anymore. My eyes were on Jake's bat, on the promise we'd kept, on the truth we'd unearthed. Some truths refused to stay buried, and some promises refused to be broken.